Well, good morning, everyone. Thomas Montgomery here. It is October 14th, 2021. We get together with our distribution partners most weekday mornings, unless travel gets in the way like it did earlier this week. It's a pleasure to visit with you. We have a really important topic today that we're going to go through. So I have my screen shared with you. And as you can tell, it's the white label page of the IIMFL website. What we're going to talk about are some key economic triggers. So talking to you as a white label partner. So if you're just an affiliate, you're welcome to listen in, but this is really a conversation for our white label partners. So let's talk about key economic triggers. So you come up with a prospect, however you get the prospect, that's irrelevant right now. What do you first do with that prospect if you're a white label partner? You need to get them under agreement. The agreement templates are here. You don't have to use these templates, and if you do want to use them, you can change them as you want. You are not contracting the clients with us as a white label partner. You're contracting the client with you. We recently had a white label partner that didn't realize that, so we're clarifying that. As a white label partner, we have a relationship with you. As a white label partner, you have a relationship with the client, what we're going to call the white label client. So you will contract with the client. We strongly recommend that you have a written contract with your client to protect yourself and protect the clients, make sure everyone's on the same page. So that is first of all. So that's the first mistake that we see happening. Some people aren't listening to the trainings that we've had, white label onboarding. We put it as bookends, white label onboarding. And so some white label partners will just submit clients in here, which I realize we're not to yet. But the first thing you need to do is get the client under contract. Agree? Okay. Now, with that being said, then what's next? Then you need to submit the client. This you should think of as an order form. When you submit the client here, you're saying that you've got the client contracted and you want to place an order with us so we can do what we do in our relationship in terms of helping that client get from where they're at to where they want to be with the programming, the Access to Capital program. So would you ever submit a prospect here? Absolutely not. They would be a client of yours after they've completed the agreement. Now, economic triggers. So once they have contracted with you, even before you've submitted them here, which is really step 2, once they've contracted with you, that is the first economic event. Because you can go to your QuickBooks or however you're tracking your revenue and your assets and your receivables, and you can put in typically an accounts receivable of $13,500. So every time a client signs up, you anticipate receiving $13,500. Now you might say, Tom, where in the world does that number come from? And I don't know if that number is right for you or not, but I'll tell you where the number came from and you can adjust it. So based upon how you contract with your client, they're going to typically owe you a $2,500 deposit after their first tranche of financing. So they don't owe it to you yet, but since the contract is executed, you know it's coming. And then also you'll typically set up a performance fee of 10%. You're guaranteeing 100,000. So 10% of 100,000 is 10,000. And then you're going to be getting them a key person policy. You might do that yourself or delegate that. And that's usually another 1,000. So that's where the 13,500 comes in. Again, it could be that it's more or less based upon how you contract with the client. And again, the 100,000 capital raise is the minimum. If we help them raise 200,000, then of course you got another 10,000 coming to you. But we're just going, normally you would just book the deal. That's what we're going to call it. You book the deal at the contractual rate. So normally you will book each deal in your system as an AR, accounts receivable, of 13,500. So that's the first economic event. The second economic event is when you submit them here, because now you're placing that order, as I made reference to a moment ago. So here you're booking your accounts receivable, money that's going to be coming into you, $13,500 or whatever that amount you project to be based upon how you contract with your clients. Now you're going to book an accounts payable because you know that you're promising to pay us to process the client. How much do you promise to pay us? It's in the white label agreement, right? So for example, we know that there's going to be at least $1,250 coming to us for our half of the deposit. Of course, it doesn't come to us from you until after the client pays you, after the client's had their capital raise. But the point is, this is the second economic trigger. So the first one is you're posting your receivable, which is normally $13,500. The second is you need to go book an accounts payable. Do you owe us right now? Of course not. Are we going to invoice you right now? Of course not. That's not the deal. That's not what the agreement is. But this is the second mistake. I see some white label partners, they'll go out and contract with clients, and then they'll start submitting clients, and they don't realize that these are economic events, right? There's an order being placed, and you're promising to pay us $1,250. Now, when does the $1,250 get paid to us? After we invoice you. We're going to talk about invoice triggers in a moment. So, a naive person would say, well, I don't like this business model. I just want to make money. I don't want to have any expenses. Well, you and I know that's hogwash. No one that has any sophistication thinks they're going to run a business with 100% profit margin. It doesn't work that way. There's not businesses of scale that you don't have expenses. So our deal with our white label partners is let's do a 50-50 split. Can't argue that, right? 50-50, right down the middle. You get the first 50, we get the second 50. Can't beat it. So as revenue or receivables are posted from the contracting between you and a client, then there's a payable that's going to be paid in the future, not right away, for our portion of the payout, which is the $1,250 of the deposit. Okay, so we've had two economic triggers. The first one is when you have money that you know is coming into you because you've contracted a client. We'll call that accounts receivable. And then secondly, you know you're going to have a bill in the future of $1,250 for our half of the refundable deposit. So now let's fast forward a bit. So you submitted the client. What happens? We email you and notify you, yep, we got the client, we're processing them. So that email goes to you, not to the client. And in the body of the email, it has a merge in, and it'll show you the client's name. So it's just a confirmation of, oh yeah, I know I submitted them. Great, these folks are processing them. And then almost immediately after that, Adobe is going to send out the funding proposal packet to your white label client, copying you, and it goes in a white label format. And so then they're going to get that, and you're going to want to prompt them to complete that application. Now we're going to start talking about what if scenarios. So we always know this happens first, you contract with a client, and we know this happens second, you submit the client. Now, as a white label client, and I see John and others on here, just keep in mind, as a white label client, we made a deal. We made a deal that we're going to support you and assist you and give you the ability to generate a lot of money in this 50-50 split. Didn't charge anything up front. Didn't charge anything up front. But what you promised to do, each of you that's a white label partners, you said, yep, I'll do this. And after a 1-month ramp up, I promise to do at least 8 deals a month, 2 a week on average. That is easy to do. And we're here to help you and assist you and make sure you do that. But just keep that in your mind. You've promised to do this 8 times a month. And you've promised to do this 8 times a month, right? So if you're not on track for that, we're right about the midpoint of October. Don't worry about it. Let's get together and let's figure out how to make sure to hit that 8 at the end of October, because we want to keep you in good standing. All right, so once you have contracted with the client, once you've submitted the client, we just covered 2 points of communication go out, one to you to let you know the client's been set up in our system, the second of which is the Adobe funding proposal that goes to the client and you're copied on. I was talking to one of our white label partners yesterday. He has submitted in, and forgive me, my memory's not as crisp as it should be, I think 38 clients, which is good. I mean, it's not great, it's good. And I ask him, and I'll leave his name out of it, are you following up with these clients? No. Have you talked to these clients after they signed up? No. Well, that's bad, because you know what happens after the client has contracted? Someone needs to support them. And we've told you, hey, if you want our staff to do the support for you, we can do that. But by default, the white label partner, that's why we're doing a 50-50 split. And so for the love of God, what you should do is, once you see that they signed up and we've set them up and we sent them the funding proposal, I would be running to the phone, calling them and saying, hey, Joe, hey, Susie, hey, thanks for enrolling. We're excited to work with you. We're ready to get your first tranche of financing. If I was copied on it, so I see it. If you check your email, you should have an Adobe funding proposal. Doesn't cost anything, doesn't impact your credit to fill it out. But what that allows us to get this process going. Do you see it, Susie? Do you see it, Joe? And make sure that they fill that out, because if they don't fill that out, then we're not able to move forward. And so let's look at it in a different perspective. So let's say you have Joe. So Joe contracted with you, you submitted Joe, and we've implemented Joe as I've described. 2 emails, one to you to let you know we've set them up. The second is the Adobe funding proposal. What if Joe just never fills out that funding app? Then Joe is breaching your agreement. Joe's not participating. Joe's in default. Joe owes you money because he's in default. Read the agreement. It's your agreement. I mean, and maybe you've written it differently, but by normal language that we've provided, Joe's in default of you. What would I recommend that you do? Invoice Joe. And just, it doesn't have to be mean. Just say, hey, Joe, it appears you're not participating. We've sent you a funding app. You've not filled it out. We're at a stalemate. If you want to quit, here's the invoice. You might say, well, how much do you invoice him for? You're going to invoice him for whatever the agreement says you can, but normally it's the $2,500 deposit and then the $10,000, 10% of the guaranteed 100,000 capital raise. So you would normally invoice Joe at that point $12,500 for breaching the agreement. Now, if Joe's logical at all, he'll realize, well, that's not a good deal. I don't want to pay $12,500 and get nothing in return. And of course, that's not what you want either. You want to fulfill, you and I, we want to fulfill what we said we would for Joe. But if Joe's not participating, you need to invoice him because he owes you that money, because he signed the contract here, and you owe us the money because you placed the order. Just ignoring Joe or not paying attention to Joe doesn't make these obligations go away. Now, if you don't want to hold Joe to the contract he has with you, I guess that's between you and him, but you still owe us money. And this is not designed to be a negative drain. But if you ignore all of your agreements or some of your agreements and place orders, now you have negative cash flow, because now you're paying us for this, or you're owing us this, but you're not collecting money. So if Joe, in this example, contracts with you, you submit, and he never fills out the funding app, then we can't move forward in getting funding for the refundable deposit. Then you would want to invoice the client for breach. And we're not going to come after you, right? So we just need to know that you're working on resolving that, because you've got a couple options with the Joes of the world, using that example. Forgive me if any of you are named Joe. I'm just using that generically. So if the client doesn't participate and they breach and you invoice them, let us know so we can note our system. And then really the client either agrees to pay the invoice, or they agree to get back active and participating. So then you would just void the invoice out, or we could sell that debt to a debt buyer, or you could send that to a collection agency, or you could use a contingency only attorney that would sue him, and you wouldn't have to pay the attorney. The attorney would collect those fees from the default client. But we got to do something with it, right? Because you owe us for the order, client owes you. And so all we ask is, if you have a client that's not participating, let us know. We had an issue this morning with Dion. Dion's not on the call. So one of Dion's clients It wasn't that Dion's client didn't fill out the funding app. He did. That was the example we've been on up to this point in the conversation. But he filled out the funding app and didn't accept any of the funding. Okay, and that's fair enough. Clients do not have to accept the first tranche financing. The model's not designed to force them to take a funding offer that they don't want or they don't like. So what happens if you're a white label partner and your client says, no, I don't want to accept that financing for my refundable deposit? Well, then what you do is say, okay, you don't have to do that. And then you send them an invoice and say, okay, here's the invoice for the $2,500 that you promised to pay. We promised to help you get financing to finance it. We did that. You said no. So now the client owes you, the white label partner, the $2,500. Maybe they'll reconsider and say, oh, shoot, I'm better off financing it. Maybe I'll go back and accept it. Some people will just pay the $2,500 out of pocket. If they do nothing, they're in breach of the agreement. And so if you set up your invoicing system the way that we recommend, with the way the agreement's written, the way that we do, then you're going to have those late fees, which are $50 a day after a 2-day grace period, start tagging on to that invoice to the client. And so often that will motivate them because and they agreed to it. I had someone this morning, he's kind of a consumer advocate, which is fine. He's a nice, smart man. And he's like, well, the $50 seems too much. Well, we don't want to collect any of the $50. We want people to just do what they said they would do. But if they don't, there's got to be enough pain or they'll dismiss it. So it's $50 a day late fee if they don't participate. So let's go again. So you submit a client. You contract with a client, you submit the client, and there's a couple outcomes that could come from that. Either they never fill out the funding app, which doesn't happen very often, but if that's the case, then we will notify you, and then you need to do something with that client because you have placed the order with us, you owe us, they owe you, but we're at a stalemate. So you, again, normally invoice the client and that would motivate them. If they don't pay, then you let us know. And then we need to figure out, are you going to sue them? Are you going to send them to collection agency? I guess you could write it off. Are you going to sell the debt? We got to figure out what the resolution is because both you and I have money tied up in that client that's not flowing through. So scenario one would be if they never filled out the funding app. It doesn't happen very often, but could happen. The second is they get a funding offer and then they don't accept it. And so in that case, again, you would invoice them and say, hey, you don't have to accept the funding offer according to our agreement, but you need to pay the $2,500 that you promised to pay. And then either they pay that, which is fine, or if not, then they're in breach. And again, you're back to either selling that debt, suing them, sending it to a collection agency, or I guess writing it off. It's just important to know that if you write off debts between you and your client, that doesn't write off the agreement that you and I have. I was talking to one of our more active white label partners yesterday, and she didn't get it. She just thought, oh, well, if the client doesn't want to continue, I'm just going to let them go. She says, well, that's your choice. But just because you're letting them go, that does not eliminate the contractual relationship and obligations and responsibilities between the partner and us, because we're still owed that money. So it wouldn't be smart in most cases just to tell the client, oh, you signed an agreement, you promised to do things, you owe me $12,000, $13,000. Ah, never mind. Normally, instead, you'd want to educate them and overcome whatever barrier it is to get them engaged. So you get your $13,500, and so we can get our peanuts, our $12.50. So there's three main scenarios. So the client has signed up, been submitted, and scenario one is they never fill out the funding app. Usually that's just an issue that the white label partner has not communicated with them well enough, but that's scenario one. Scenario two would be they fill out the app, but they don't want to accept funding, which is fine. They don't have to invoice them and they can pay another way. Or scenario three is they have filled out the app, they've gotten funding, and then they're not paying you. And so again, normally the deposit's $2,500. That's you normally would bill the client after their first tranche of financing. And so then if they're not paying you, then of course we're caught up in that and you're not paying us. So again, what do we need to do with the client? You need to get an invoice to them. promptly, needs to have 50, we recommend $50 a day late fees, as the agreement template says. After a couple of days, then we've got to make a decision. Are we going to sue them? Are we going to send them to a collection agency? Are you going to write it off? What is it you're going to do? So just keep in mind, some of you may see invoices to you from us because there's been a breakdown in the system, but don't misinterpret that. I mean, it's only a reflection of what you promised to pay when you ordered. If the client is not engaged, we're going to be able to delay that invoice until we get it resolved with the client. We don't want it to be a negative cash flow issue to you, but we want to go into this eyes wide open, right? You are generating receivables as clients sign with you, and you are generating payables when you submit clients into us. And so we're going to get a little tighter with our accounting systems. So even this morning, some of you might have seen invoices come over for $1,250 because your client is either refused finance. Let's use that example. With a client this morning said, nope, I don't want to accept the financing. So we notify the white label partner, hey, your client doesn't want to accept financing. You need to talk to them. And then we go ahead and generate the invoice to the white label partner for the $1,250. And so we don't want that white label partner to come up with that out of pocket, but it's going to hopefully prompt that white label partner to say, uh-oh, I got to go prioritize this. I got to go back with the client and get this resolved. So if you decide to sell it to a debt buyer, we can facilitate that, and then that would negate your invoice. So the invoice goes away like that. It didn't cost you anything. So that's one option. The other is you get a contingency only attorney, which means cost you nothing, to go sue the person. And then we would defer our invoice until that's resolved. So that's fine. And then the other scenario is you send them off to a collection agency. And again, we would defer your invoice to us until that's resolved. So we're just trying to have a good economic accounting discussion. You're out creating receivables. You should be generating well over $100,000 a month in receivables if you're active at all. And that's by clients signing up. The other side of that transaction is you're creating accounts payables every time that you submit a client. It's not a bad thing. That's just the cost of us providing the back end of the process. And so normally we don't invoice you until a trigger has occurred. We see the client's gotten funding. Great, client just got $35,000. So we invoice you our portion, understanding that you're going to go collect from them and then you're going to pay us. We just want to be cognizant that if they're not paying you, we need to be in communication and resolve that. And those normal resolutions would include either sending it to a contingency only attorney to sue them, a collection agency. You just resolve it with them, which would be preferable. Or I guess you could write it off, but I wouldn't recommend writing it off. Okay, so I want to stop there and I want to get into your questions about this, because we've got a number of you who are active white label partners, which is awesome. And so what questions, comments, concerns do you have? And so Pauline, I'd love to hear from you, and Spencer from you, and Bernard from you, and Charles from you. There's just a bunch of you that are very active. Now, those of you that are white label partners that aren't active, that's a whole nother issue, right? We need to figure out how to get you active and how to get you to do this at least 8 times a month, including in October, which is not hard to do. We've talked about free leads and all different types of leads ad nauseum. You know how to contract them. You've gone through all these training videos. You know how to submit them. It's not hard to do. But our discussion today is less about those of you that are struggling to meet the minimum number of 8 a month, 2 a week on average, but instead I'm wanting to talk to those of you that are current white label partners. You've submitted clients, and making sure that you're running your shop like a business, which should include posting an accounts receivable each time you sign up a client, and then posting a payable each time you submit that client. Okay, so who has questions on that process? Who of you have questions or concerns regarding clients flowing through the system? What can I do to help you? All right, so I'm waiting for you to put in a comment or a question in the Q&A of Zoom. I'm going to summarize one more time. So today what we talked about is understanding these economic triggers in the life cycle of a white label client. A white label client is contracted with you, not with us. We have a contract with you as a white label partner. You have a client relationship with a white label client. They contract with you, you're probably using this template or something similar. You don't have to. Once you have them under contract, then you submit them. That's the order form. You know, from the moment that you place that order, you have an accounts payable to us, not due immediately, but of $12.50. Again, you know, once you sign them, you know that you have typically a receivable of $13,500. That's a lot more, so it's a good deal for you, right? And so then you submit the client. We send you an email to say, yep, client's been set up. White label Adobe goes to the client, copied on you, which is the funding proposal. They get daily reminders. They complete that. And there's really only two different outcomes that can occur from that funding app. Either they're approved for cash funding or they're approved for 2,500 financing. Everybody's approved. Everybody's approved. Everybody's approved. There's no one that won't get approved for one of those two scenarios. Once we've ran the app, we see what they qualify for, we email you and we let you know. And frankly, we have two different templates, only two different ones. One says, hey, this client got approved for cash funding. Here are the instructions. So at the top of that email, it's in bold and italics. That's our message to you. Everything beneath it, you could share with the client. You want to help them accept the cash funding because that gets them money and gets you paid. The other scenarios, they didn't get any cash funding offers, and that's okay too. That'll happen. And so if that's the case, then there's a different email template that we send you. Again, it has bold and italics at the top message, any message we need to give to you. And normally what we're going to say is, hey, Ben, your client, Joe Smith, didn't qualify for any cash funding offers. So please help Joe with the instructions below, which we give you detailed instructions of how to prompt him to go ahead and accept the 2,500 financing. And what you should be thinking is always about fundability and credibility, right? The 3 C's that we talk about so often: credit, cash flow, collateral. Well, if a client doesn't get a cash funding offer up front, what is that indicative of? Either their credit is subpar or their income is subpar or some combination of the two. And it's okay. We're still here to help them. We still guarantee them the $100,000. It doesn't change our relationship with them, but it does send a signal to your brain that light bulb goes off. Okay, I need to get them to accept this 2,500 financing to keep them compliant and move forward in the process. But also, they're probably a really good prospect for the total credit rebuild, so we can improve their fundability. Well, why would you want to get someone in total credit rebuild? Which isn't the subject of today's discussion, but it's relevant because, and I can pull it up here. Why is it relevant? Well, we need to get them their total capital raise of 100,000 or more. And if they have fundability issues, then we need to address it. And that's what the TCR program does through the sweep, through the boost, by creating verifiable income and building collateral. And this is an economic trigger for you. We've talked about this, and it's in this training right here. You can build in whatever commission you want for each client you enroll in the TCR. Normally that commission is no less than 100. Normally it's no more than 1,000. But we're providing assistance to the client. We're resolving problems. We're helping them become more fundable. And bam, you got paid again. In addition to the access to capital. Was that double dipping? No, you're helping them with something else, right? If you have the landscaper come out and take care of your bushes and your shrubs, but then you also give them another task to go dig a fish pond, are they double dipping? No, it's a different service. The total credit rebuild is a different service. So does anyone have any questions about these economic triggers? When a client signs your agreement, they're promising to pay you. They're promising to participate. All the promises are outlined in the agreement. And then, of course, you're promising to do your portion. That's separate from the agreement we have with you, which is the white label partnership agreement. There are bilateral promises there. You want to get engage with the client and help them through that process. Again, the one white label client I made reference to, great guy. Again, I think it was 38 referrals. Like none of them are progressing because they've never talked to the white label partner. And we're not talking to them, right? Because that's the concept of the white label relationship. With the white label relationship, you're the support. Now, if you need us to take over the support, you have to let us know. That's a formal transition. And so you're essentially delegating that to us. All right, with that being said, let's go hit it hard today. Let us know if there's any questions. We're getting caught up from the backlog of being out for 4 days, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. We're making good headway there, and we'll talk to you all soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.